Hello, it's a pleasure to be able to participate in such an important program here together with Rabbi Michael Taubes. I was going to start with a couple of core points here. Number one is some really important new research that is done by Dr. Conrath, Konrath. And what she finds is that as she's carefully tracked empathy levels over the last the last number of decades, especially since the year 2000, there's been a precipitous drop in chesed. There's been a precipitous drop in empathy and caring for others. And there's a number of theories as to why. Obviously, we all know that there's been a tremendous increase in kind of attacks and counterattacks online. We know about the online disinhibition effect, where we tend to be crueler online when we can't see the hurt look on the faces of those who we're attacking. And particularly what has been happening in the media and various news networks, coupled with the impact of social media, has made the world into a place where chesed is no longer as obvious as it used to be. You know, we're told that the Bria Chatichon of the Mishkan, the central beam of the Mishkan, the Medrash tells us, was made out of the wood cut from the tree that Avram Avinu sat under as he did his chesed. So it's core, olam chesed yibana. The fact that the world is built on acts of loving kindness is really a core kind of reality. And what is particularly fortunate for us is that as people of faith, as people of really living a life that's based on the cornerstone of understanding how important chesed is, we almost see it as obvious that, of course, we have to build our life around acts of doing chesed for others. Here's a couple of research summaries. People who daven every day in studies are 30 percentage points more likely to give money to tzedakah than people who never daven. Belonging to a congregation adds 32 percentage points relative to those who don't in terms of giving tzedakah. People who just believe in beliefs are more likely to give than those who say beliefs don't matter as long as one is a good person. And it goes on and on. You know, I don't think anybody listening to this is going to be surprised to hear that people who give, who spend a life with chesed and empathy and caring for others, are 3.5 times more likely to say that they're happy. They're much more likely to say that their health is good. And then in one of the more fascinating studies I've seen on this topic, they do functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs, and they put people under an fMRI and scan the brain as they're giving tzedakah, and they find that as you give tzedakah in this study, the part of the brain that lights up is the mesolimbic pathway, which is the brain's reward center. Literally, there is a giver's high. And then what I find particularly inspiring is the research on the connection between health and volunteering to help others. As Frank Riesman, a well-known social worker, an expert in this area, says, summarizing this research, the act of helping another heals the helper more than the person helped. Here's the two studies that I'm always so heartened by. When elderly individuals volunteer, they have a 40% lower probability of dying in a given year than matched controls. Then in a study of people with multiple sclerosis, they find that when they assign patients with MS to two groups, the group asked to provide unconditional support and positive regard to members of the other group, they show between 3 and 7 times more improvement in their symptoms. And the benefits include increased self-awareness, confidence, fewer symptoms of depression. And then in a classic study that started in 1956, they looked at a large group of wives and mothers in New York and very carefully controlled the study as they followed them over the next 3 decades, and found that those women who engaged in volunteer work at least once a week lived longer and had better physical functioning than those who didn't. Before I give over this talk to Rabbi Taubes, I wanted to talk about, just briefly, about the power of really the power of empathy. There's 3 kinds of empathy in the research. Different parts of our brain light up when we tune into these kinds of empathy. One is emotional empathy. If you see somebody suffering and you just automatically, without thinking, feel their suffering, okay, that's called cognitive and emotional empathy. Then there's empathic concern, where we use our heads, we use the part of our brain where we put on the Shel Rosh every weekday morning, and we try hard to figure out what's wrong or what's the problem that our friends or community members are facing. And then we go and we try to figure out how to help them by showing compassion and empathic concern. And then the final kind of empathy is the nosei bo'olam chaver, where we actually actively try to help with actions. A whole different part of the brain, typified by the Chafetz Chaim, who would sleep on the floor during the time that the Jewish men were drafted to fight in the Russian army, and he literally changed his behavior to literally feel their pain. Let me just end with a brief story. A number of years ago, I was at a Chai Lifeline retreat, and the chairman of the board was sitting with me and a bunch of friends at a meal, and he says, you know something? He's saying in Eretz Yisrael, there are 2 kinds of people. He says they're either Balei Tshuva or future Balei Tshuva. Everybody's, or people who've been from birth. But everybody's either a Baal Tshuva from birth or a future Baal Tshuva. And he tells me the following story. He was on a plane and he had read that there was a family traveling to New York to get a heart transplant for their young daughter. And he sees the family, whose picture was the back page of the Ma'ariv that day. He sees them, the family sitting next to him in the plane. And he goes over to the mother of the family and goes over to the father. And he asks them the obvious question, who's going to care for you? Who's going to help you, spell you when you're trying to take care of your child? Who is it that's going to basically give you a place to stay? And they all answered, these were secular kibbutzniks, I have no idea, I have no idea, I have no idea. And it turns out that people told them, just wait till you meet the first frum person on the plane and tell them what you're going through and tell them what your challenges are, and they'll take care of you. The plane lands, and this chairman of the board of Chai Lifeline had obviously texted ahead of time, and meeting them was an unbelievable committee of people. It was people who took care of Hachnasas Archim, gave them an apartment to live in, and literally took care of them for the entire period of time in the years of their daughter's gradual kind of recovery. And on the day that their oldest son was about to go home, because he had to serve in Sahal in the Israeli army. He comes to the chairman of the board's house, which is a big mansion in Borough Park, and he says, I have a present for you. The man says, look, I live in a mansion. I don't need your present. He says, you don't understand. And he takes out from this bag that he had a pair of tefillin. And he said, I'd like you to teach me how to put these on. He said, I've never been observant until now. Now I'm going to be observant. And from that day on, he was a frum Jew, and every member of the family, one by one, became observant because of the power of chesed. What we're about to hear is a powerful, powerful way that we too could become Balei Chesed on a regular daily kind of basis. What we're about to hear is Rabbi Taubes sharing with us how we can bring into our daily life a way of including the members of our community who have special needs, adults with special needs, to make them feel a part of our community. It's daily chesed that, as I just reviewed, is going to do us a tremendous, tremendous tova. And I'm so happy that Rabbi Taubes has agreed to take over the rest of the program in sharing sources and sharing ideas on how we can bring actively chesed into our lives.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pelcovitz. It's always a great pleasure to hear you speak. Wonderful, inspiring stories and fascinating statistics. I'd never heard those statistics, and it just shows you the power of chesed. But as we talk today, in advance of Tisha B'Av, about Avos Yisrael and chesed, it behooves us all to remember that there are indeed many less fortunate people in the community and people who are not able to fend for themselves or to stand up for themselves in the same way as others can. And true Avos Yisrael and true chesed really means taking into account, as Dr. Pelcovitz mentioned, these people as well. And I speak now not as a Rav or as a Rebbe, but as the father of a young adult with autism. And I'd just like to share some personal thoughts as to what many of us can do to live with chesed. A lot of times we hear about students especially, but others who have quote-unquote chesed projects. I'm not minimizing the significance of that within the yeshivas and with the girls' schools. They have to do chesed projects and chesed hours, and it's a useful chinuch tool. But it's not really what it's all about. What chesed, as Dr. Pelcovitz alluded to, is a way of life. It's a section of the brain that develops. And a person has to see someone else not as his chesed project, whether it's an elderly person that you're visiting in a hospital, whether it's somebody who's sick that you're visiting, whether it's a poor person, you're delivering food for them for Tomchei Shabbos, or whether it's a disabled person, whether emotionally and mentally disabled or physically disabled, you're helping participate in a particular activity. It's not my chesed project. It's because I recognize this person is also created with a Tzelem Elokim. And that's really what it's all about. The pasuk in the beginning of Bereshis in Parak Aleph pasuk Chav Zayin tells us that all human beings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everybody, but Tzelem Elokim. Whatever exactly Tzelem Elokim means, it's an image, so to speak, the stamp of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara Sanhedrin Daf Lamed Zayin marvels at the difference between a human being and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whereas a human being, if he has a stamp or a mold in which to make something, so everything comes out exactly the same. Whereas HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses the same mold, but everything comes out different. And we're all different. And the Medrash tells us in Parashas Pinchas, in the Medrash Tanchuma Siman Yud, Kashem she'ein partzuf osein shoven zelozeh, kach ein daitem shoven zelozeh. Just like no people look exactly alike, their physical appearance is not exactly the same, so too, and certainly psychologists and psychiatrists know this well, no people think exactly the same way. And there are different people who have different ways of understanding things, different levels and different abilities, but they're all people. They're all created with Tzelem Elokim. And as Jews, the Mishnah Pirkei tells us that we have this extra level being Banim Atem L'Hashem Elokechem. And that's regardless of a person's ability or disability. And that's a challenge. to see the Tselem Elokim, to see the Bonei Matem L'Hashem Elokechem in every member of our community. And it's hard, and I understand it's hard, especially when dealing with people who don't act the same way we act, and sometimes we're offended or nervous, sometimes we're repulsed even by sometimes the way people behave, certain people with special needs, sometimes we're repulsed by their physical appearance, and it makes us nervous, and we want to look the other way when we see it. And I'm not saying it's abnormal. The truth is, the Gemara says in Tainus on Daf Hey, the Gemara tells a story about on Daf Chaf, the Gemara tells a story about one of the great Tanoim who was traveling somewhere, and he met up with a person whom he found to be exceedingly ugly, exceedingly of an unattractive appearance, to the point that he simply had to respond. And he said, are all the people from your town as ugly as you are? He lost it. He just lost his thinking. And the person responded, why don't you go to the craftsman who made me and tell him that you disapprove of how I was made? In other words, go tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu that you're not happy with the way he made me. And of course, the Tana was devastated, and he apologized, and he begged for forgiveness, and so on and so forth. But it's a normal reaction to some extent to see somebody who looks so different, who acts so different, and we kind of want to stay away. And that's not the approach. We have to overcome that as people in all the different ways that Dr. Pelcovitz mentioned, including the Nosei Ba'olim Chavero, not because it's my chesed project, because these are people. And sof kol sof, I speak for my son, Baruch Hashem. He's in his 20s now, and a wonderful person. But as my father, Alav Shalom, said at his bar mitzvah, at the end of the day, he wants to love and to be loved just like everybody else. And isn't that true of all of us? Who doesn't want to be told you did a good job? Who doesn't want a pat on the back? Who doesn't want to smile? And sometimes it's all it takes just to include somebody else. And we have to recognize, you know what? These are people also. They have disabilities, but first of all, many of them have abilities. And we have to highlight that as well. I'll speak now in my shul, and it's not because anything special that I did, but I have a young man in my shul who has Down syndrome. He's actually one of the Gaboyim. He's extremely well organized. He knows very well when we have to have 2 Sifrei Torah and when we have to roll the Sifrei Torah. He has other disabilities, but I didn't give him that job because, well, I felt sorry for him, so I'm going to include him. No, he does the job because he's good at it and he's responsible about it. He also is one of the people who sets up the Shalosh Shudas, and when he can't come, he calls the head guy and says, I'm not going to be here this Shabbos. He takes his job very seriously. Sometimes, and it's true that it's more limited for women in shul, but men in shul have disabilities. Maybe can't dam for the Amid, can't give a shir, but they can have psicha, they can do galila, maybe in some cases even hagba. We have to look for things to include people in what we're doing. And whatever activities are going on, we can include them. First of all, we see today what can be done simply by treatment. At one time, of course, certain people simply could never be educated and they couldn't be taught. We know that's not the case today. We know the case sometimes that people can be taught things which we're amazed that they're taught. I was very nervous about my son when he became bar mitzvah because he had certain sensory issues, as certain people with his disability do. And we were worried about tefillin, and I learned the halachas, and I know he's potter from tefillin. He has never missed a day of tefillin. It meant something to him, presumably because he saw me, he saw his brothers do it, and saw other people in the shul do it. You never know what impact you can have on somebody else. But we have to treat them not as chesed projects, but as people that we want to associate with. And by the way, it starts at a very young age. Okay, imagine the parents. And again, I've been through it with my wife, and we're not complaining at all. But, and there are wonderful organizations that work with these students. I don't have to go into that now. I'm not taking anything away. But, when you have a child with disabilities and all the other parents are talking about what their kid is doing and what he's done and what she's able to do now, and they're talking about GAN, or they're talking about summer camps. Again, we're somewhat limited now, but, Shanan Kitikunam, and so find a way to include them. You know what pressure sometimes parents with special needs are under on a daily basis, talking as Dr. Pelcovitz did about daily chesed? You're going to the store, and the woman can't go to the store because she's home with her kid now. So call from the store. I'm in the store. You need me to pick something up? Simple things, but it just means being in tune. And when the kid gets a little older, invite him to the play group. He can't participate. He won't understand how to play baseball necessarily, although some can the same way. Or the girl can't do whatever the activities they're doing, but they can be part of it. You cannot imagine what it means. I know, again, in the case of my son, there were some now young men his age who still, again, right now we're restricted somewhat in our movement, but still call him up from time to time on a Sunday. Yosef, you want to go out for ice cream? They take him to the local ice cream parlor, to get. He's thrilled. He's a young adult. He doesn't want to spend time with his old, boring parents like any other young adult. He can be taught. He can be part of something. Everyone wants to be part of something. My son, again, I'm speaking my personal experience. He hears there's a Shalom Zachar in the shul. He hears there's a bris. He wants to be part of it because he's part of the Jewish community. These individuals are part of the Jewish community. So it means a sensitivity. And I say it's not always easy. And it's always easy, like, I'm not going to get involved. And we genuinely feel sorry. I think that was the first thing Dr. Pelcovitz mentioned, the empathy. We do feel sorry. We're sincere. But that's only a first step. The ultimate step is no siba'ol and chavera. Help the people out. Help the parents out. The parents need tremendous help. And I have to say something, while there are improvements that can be made, sof kol sof, you're not going to be cured. We don't have a cure for these things. Certain illnesses, Baruch Hashem, there are cures. There's no cure for it. Could be, and sometime in the future will be. There are major improvements. The Ksav Sofer actually has a tshuva that he went one time actually talks about his father, the Ksav Sofer. He writes in his tshuva. I have the source over here, so just for the sake of completeness. I'm sorry, Shevet Sofer, his grandson. The tshuva is Shevet Sofer. Even Ezra Simon Chafalov talks about when his father, the Ksav Sofer, went to the school for the deaf in Vienna, a major school for the deaf in Vienna, and he saw what they were educated. He passed it immediately. You have to write tefillin for all of the Jewish people here. He couldn't believe before they were uneducable. Now they're educable. We've come a long, long way. But that's in terms of education, in terms of the social piece, in terms of feeling belonging, feeling they're invited for a Shabbos lunch. Okay, it's okay. You can have a bunch of friends over. Have this young man or this young woman over too. They can't participate in the conversation the same way, but you cannot imagine what it means to them. And sof kol sof for us as Jews, these people are part of Klal Yisrael, and they're very much members of the community. Moshe Feinstein writes in a tshuva, he goes, Moshe Yerdei Chelik Beis Siman Zayin, HaTorah Kula Nitna Kulam. The Torah was given to all of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's children. The Torah was given to all Jews. Even though they might be potter from certain mitzvahs, we won't go into now the halachic technicalities, but they may not be able to perform certain mitzvahs, still, they're part of the bris of Torah. They have Kedushas Yisrael. And so we have to include these people. It's very, very difficult, despite the wonderful programs, for many of these people to feel a part of what is going on. Does it take effort? Yes. Will it take away from other activities? Sometimes, yes. But it makes us better people, as Dr. Pelcovitz mentioned before. The Gemara records a certain Gemara Erevin Daf Nun Daled Beis, a certain Rabbi Preda, who had a student who would not grasp the lesson that his Rebbe was teaching him until he heard it 400 times. Let's assume 400 is an exaggeration, but he heard it many, many times. And, Rabbi Preda might have gotten frustrated. Okay, he might have gotten frustrated. So what am I wasting my time? He doesn't understand it anyway, but he didn't. In fact, the Gemara goes on to tell a story. He taught another 400 times till he got it, even if the number is an exaggeration. Presumably, Rabbi Preda could have, quote unquote, accomplished more on his own had he devoted time to his own learning and to his own further development. But he saw the importance of reaching this young man, this student. And there's so many stories and so many ways we can reach people. Chesed and Avas Yisrael extends to everybody and to all the people who are part of our community, to all of mankind. We're speaking now to our community, Avas Yisrael. We know what led to the Churban of the Bayis Sheni, the Sinas Yisrael, Sinas Chinam, Avas Chinam. And in a certain sense, this is the purest Avas Chinam, because maybe the person can't give it back, not in the same way. If I help my friend out, my friend can help me out. I go to his house, he'll invite me. I bring him to my house, he'll invite me to his house, and so on. And sometimes with special needs, young adults, it's not the same. But still, that's Avas Chinam. And hopefully, if we take these lessons to heart, we understand that it has to be part of what's inside. Like the Pelcovitz referred to before, Olam Chesed Yivana. But the Olam consists of many, many people, many different types of people. And just like the Medrash Tanchuma says, just like our thinking, just like our faces don't look the same, our thinking, our minds are not the same either, but we're all part of Klal Yisrael. And therefore, we need that idea of chesed being something internal. And it was documented how it functions in the brain, and we can work on that. We'll merit to see the Avas Chinam and ultimately the Binyan Beis HaMikdash.
Mitzvah